Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. This is part 3 of the Polistes Dominula European Paper Wasp nest development series, documenting a complete season for this nest from the time it was discovered in May of 22 through November of 22. Please check out our YouTube channel playlist to view part 1 and part 2. This will give you the best viewing experience for part 3. Let's begin with a 5-minute preview of this series. This video was shot in the USA, in the state of Indiana, and North America. In this series, we show you the entire life cycle of a European paper wasp colony. That's Polistes Dominula, from the time it was discovered in May of 2022, when it had maybe a dozen new cells built, all the way through midsummer when it peaked in size with over 200 cells built on the nest, till the end of the nest life cycle in October-November of 2022, when it wound down and the population died off and flew off to mate. We'll show you the cell count that were visible during each of the growth stages it went through. It was fun to document how fast they were building out this nest. We'll show you all the drama these two co-foundress queens went through as they defended their nest from predators of all sorts that wanted to eat their eggs or larvae or parasitize their nest. We watched them fight off spiders, carpenter ants. The ants in particular were very aggressive and they kept attacking the nest. You'll see this ant crawled right into one of the cells and tried to eat one of the eggs right there. The wasp turns around, sets off her alarm buzzing wings, and she grabs it by the leg and throws it right out of there. This was a very common occurrence. It was a daily thing, having to fight for their nest, fight for their territory. We couldn't help but be impressed at the number of times they used their wasp judo, just grabbing the leg or the antenna of the invader and just chucking it off the nest. There were parasitic wasps coming at them. They were always on alert and vigilant. They fought off mites and they fought off other types of insects that attempted to live in or around the nest. There's a whole related ecosystem of insects that target wasp nests and wasp larvae. We'll show you what it looks like when the wasp queens lay eggs inside the cells, which is what you see here. We'll show you all the life stages inside the nest, from the eggs to the newly hatched larva, to the mature larva, all the way through to the pupating larvae that become adult wasps when they chew their way out of the cell after pupation. And we'll also show you what it looks like when the pupating wasps, who have developed through the egg and larva stage, are born and chew their way out of the pupating silk caps that they cover their cells with. And we'll show you the process of how they go out to forage for wood fiber, which they collect off of aged wood, and they fly it back to the nest, where they will inspect the nest and decide which cell they want to work on, and they'll build each cell one at a time, and they'll maintain any that need repair with that material. We'll also show you how they bring back insect protein that they hunt in the wild, they share it with each other, and they malaxate it, which means they chew it up into a fine pulp, and they use that food to feed their larvae. And we'll show you that process in detail. You don't have to watch a wasp colony very long to find out what good biological control agents they are, reducing populations of insects around your property. Unfortunately, with invasive species, this goes both ways. It can be damaging to the local ecosystem if they're reducing the amount of resources available to our native wasps, who rely basically on the same insect population to feed their larvae. We'll show you how they bring nectar back and create a honey-like substance for food. They also bring back water, and they attach droplets to the cell walls to hydrate the nest and keep it cool. We'll show you the process of Trophallaxis, which is where they engage in mouth-to-mouth exchange of fluids. You'll see how the two foundresses engage in dominance behaviors, such as here, where they're nipping at each other and headbutting each other. And you'll see as the dominance hierarchy becomes established on the nest, the alpha female will shake her abdomen like a rattlesnake, and she'll sort of nibble at the heads of the others until they drop their antenna and bow down to the queen, and that's how they maintain dominance on the nest. And we'll show you examples of that. We'll show you how later in the season the males begun to be born in the nest, and the reproductive females, who are going to be queens the following season. After they hibernate, they'll go out and start colonies. So the goal of this video is to show you the complete life cycle of a Polistes Dominula nest, the European paper wasp. They're very, very common now as invasive species here in North America. You will probably see these this upcoming spring and summer. So keep an eye out for these, and we hope when you see them next, you'll know exactly how they operate. As always, we thank you for being here. We had a great time in the 6 months that we began the channel in 2022, and we hope to bring you a lot more fun content in 23. Here we'll step back in time to June of 2022 to pick up where we left off at the end of part 2. We begin part 3 on June 14th of 2022, and as you may have seen in part 1 and part 2, this nest was started by 2 co-foundresses, 2 adult wasps who are females and have been working together to build up this nest. One of them is more of the alpha, the other one is more of the subordinate queen, but they both have been laying eggs, building the nest, and foraging for food. However, as one of the queens becomes more of the alpha, the more dominant queen, she will ultimately disallow the other subordinate from laying any eggs. And if that subordinate does lay eggs, she'll eat those eggs and she'll replace them with her own. We're about reaching that stage now where she's becoming more possessive of the nest and is doing most of the egg laying while the subordinate goes out and does most of the foraging. What you see here is one of the adult wasps coming back with a ball of wood putty in her mouth. She makes this putty out of wood fiber she collects in the wild, usually from garden stakes or old wood decks or walls of structures, sometimes from old dead trees or plant material. Down on the lower left you can see her building a cell now with that wood putty material. She squeezes the material in her mandibles along the edge of the cell she's building, and eventually that material will dry and be a perfect match with the other cells. It's pretty amazing they can do this. They use their antennas to get most of the input while they build these perfectly uniform hexagonal cells. Now in the meantime, what you see are 2 of the youngest brand new wasps who were just born on this nest. These are the first 2 that came out of the nest as pupating adults. They chewed their way out of the silk cap after pupation, and now what they want to do is acclimate to the heat and to the world around them. So they often will crawl back into a cell, any empty cell like you see here, and their abdomens are sticking out of the end of the cell. But what they do this for is because they're trying to acclimate to the world. They're not quite ready to go out and forage yet for food and supplies, and they will eventually do that. They'll take over most of those duties for the queens. However, for now, they are still kind of brand new. And so they hide their heads inside the cells because it's cooler in there than it is out in the hot air. And it's also a way for them just to kind of relax and have peace before they are quite ready to go out to start work. Now there is some indication in the research as well that this may be part of the dominance hierarchy behavior, where they will kind of just wait and stand by until one of the queens tells them to get to work. And the queens will come over, nip at their abdomens or tap them with their antennas. That's called antennal drumming. And they will give them the signal, and they should stop doing nothing and get to work. Sometimes they're just waiting for those signals. You can see here one of the adults on the nest keeps her foot on the abdomen of the 2 that are head down in the cells. And this is part of the dominance hierarchy behavior. She's explaining to them through these types of movements and this behavior that they are the subordinates. They are not going to be queens. They're not going to be laying eggs. They're going to be only supporting the nest by foraging for food, foraging for wood pulp to build the nest, feeding the larvae, checking on the larvae. That will be their job in life. And these sorts of dominance behaviors where the adults kind of hold them down, they will do this routinely throughout their lives just to remind them of their caste on this nest. An interesting behavior you may see while we're looking at these 2 abdomens. These are the tail ends of the 2 newest wasps. If you keep a close eye on them, you'll see them occasionally open up the end of their abdomen, and they will stretch out their stinger, and you'll see their venom sac inside their abdomen, and they will routinely do this while they're at rest. Most wasps, you will see this behavior occasionally, and we assume, we're not positive about this based on research yet, but the assumption is they do this stretching routine for a couple of reasons. It's probably due to cooling their body temperature, number one. So it's a part of their thermoregulation, which is kind of a multifaceted bunch of behaviors. One is they fan the nest with their wings. The adults will fan the nest, and they will keep the whole nest cool through just blowing air over it with their wings. The other one is they will sometimes go down into the nest cells to cool off, like you see them doing here. Another behavior is this opening of the end of their abdomen. So you'll see that behavior sometimes where their stinger comes out, and you can see part of the internal organs inside their abdomen, which is usually the venom sac. And that is what they're doing if you see this behavior, and we'll show you that in a moment. Another way they thermoregulate the nest is by regurgitating water that they collect in the wild and letting that water evaporate inside the cells or on top of the pupating cells. It actually drops the temperature of the nest by several degrees. Now here you see the stretching of the abdomen. See, the adult wasp actually reacted to it. We'll show that to you again here in slow motion so you can get a better look at it. Here the wasp inside the red circle is about to open its abdomen. So it opens up the end of its abdomen, stretches out its stinger, exposes its venom sac, and then the adult wasp sort of nips at it. This may be dominance behavior from the adult wasp, because also inside the abdomen would be the egg-laying organs for any female Polistes wasp. And there may be some stretching of those organs that comes natural to some of the female wasps, and maybe the dominance behavior from the adults is kind of signaling to them that no, you're not going to be doing anything with your egg-laying parts. So they kind of nip at them and discourage that behavior, perhaps. That's just a guess, but that would be part of what might make sense for the hierarchy on the nest. In addition to the thermoregulation, in addition to just simply stretching its body like any animal will do occasionally. Here you see more of the dominance behavior, where the adult wasp will keep its feet on the other wasps, just to kind of routinely let them know who's the boss. So the alpha queen will exhibit this dominance behavior constantly with all the other wasps. Here you see her pull the other adult aside, nip at its head, make it lower its antenna to her. We'll show that here again in slow motion. You'll see how the alpha foundress, or the queen, makes the subordinate co-foundress, who's the subordinate, bow down, and she'll drum her head a little bit with her antennas and her legs, maybe nip at her head a little bit until the other subordinate lowers her antenna. This is alpha behavior, which establishes hierarchy on the nest. And it's a constant thing that the alpha queen will do with all of them. Here's another example of the abdomen stretching, showing the stinger and the venom sac. And here's another example of the same thing. You'll see both of the wasps who have their heads in these cells stretch their abdomens here. And you'll see here how the adult wasp, the foundress who's the alpha queen, really stands by right over the other two newly born adults until she finally stops that behavior, goes about her business, and that signals to the two that they can come out now and carry on with whatever they're going to do that day. And at this point, another one of the wasps comes back with some more of this wood pulp that they collected in the wild, and she's going to go ahead and inspect the nest and figure out which cell she wants to build or extend or repair with that material. And this inspection is done every time they come back with more wood pulp. They check the whole nest out, and they very carefully decide where they're going to begin building. And we'll show you that here in real time while she does her inspection. And here on the lower right, she's found a place she wants to put that putty. And this wood putty is fiber that she collected out from various sources in the wild and brings back to the nest specifically to build more cells with it. And eventually you'll see that the newer adults who were born to be workers and foragers, they'll come in and they'll start doing that behavior as well very soon as they get a little bit older here. For now, we'll go ahead and speed this up a little bit and show you the building of this cell. You can see how the wood putty comes in and she regurgitates fluid to keep it moist while she works on it. It's a little darker color while it's still wet. When it dries, it'll be the exact same color as the rest of the nest. Here we see one of the co-foundresses return to the nest and start putting drops of water that she regurgitates throughout the nest. She'll put it on top of some of these white silk caps to keep them moist and cool. She'll drop some off inside some of the cells, and that's collected water that she's found out in the wild and is now regurgitating back onto the nest. And this thermoregulation technique allows evaporative cooling to drop the temperature of the nest by several degrees whenever they do this. We'll show this to you again in high speed, and if you keep your eye on the cell in the center of the red circle, you'll see the water spreading out across the cell. It's a little harder to see in real time, but here sped up you can get a better idea. And while we're blown up here, take a look at the abdomen. You'll see another abdomen stretching from this wasp in the center. She'll stretch out her venom sac and stinger. And this footage is slowed down several times. They do it so quickly it's hard to see otherwise. Here you see another wasp return with fluid and share some of that with the cells for thermoregulation. And she also does trophallaxis here with a couple of them. You'll see how she produces fluids in her mouth and they then do mouth-to-mouth contact. That's called trophallaxis, and it's how they share hydration and food oftentimes. It's also part of their communication. Here we'll slow that down and replay it for you and blow it up a little bit so you can see the trophallaxis between several of the wasps on the nest. You see how one will solicit fluids and the other will provide it. By regurgitating fluids, and the other will take a quick drink of that. And you see the large drop of fluid in her mandibles. Several of the wasps will take a quick drink of that. In all wasp nests, this is an extremely important behavior that allows them to share food, share fluids, share nutrition, and establish communication, and it's part of the dominance hierarchy behaviors, and there's a lot to it. It's a very complex behavior. Here we see one of the adult wasps return with some food, and this is insect protein she's collected in the wild, basically a meatball made out of the body of an insect that they hunted, and they'll come back and malaxate it, which means they chew it up with their mandibles and turn it into a very fine pulp, which they'll then feed to the larvae in the nest. Sometimes they'll share it with the adults on the nest, but typically it's meant for the larvae. And what they'll do is dip their heads into each cell until they decide which larva to feed, and then they will go ahead and feed that larva, or sometimes they'll share it amongst several larvae. Here one of the wasps returns with some fluids, and you can see she immediately begins to produce fluids and regurgitate this fluid for others for trophallaxis, and she'll share that with the nest, both the cells and the adults in the nest. Here again she engages in trophallaxis with two of the wasps on the nest, and you'll see her produce a fairly large droplet of fluid. So you can see how in this way she's able to help hydrate and provide nutrients for all the wasps on the nest, and she can cool the nest through thermoregulation, and she can share that with the larvae. So there's a multifaceted reason to bring back all this fluid to the nest. It's quite important for the entire nest and the whole population on it in just about all the developmental stages. Here you see some dominance behavior, sometimes referred to as darting, where they dart at each other. This is usually done by the alpha queen or the alpha foundress to get the others to continue working if they're not working when they should be, or it's a way to just simply establish who's the boss. Here's another display of aggression towards the other wasp, and she's nipping at this wasp and drumming her antenna on this wasp and sort of headbutting it and pushing it around, nipping at its legs. She'll do this occasionally with all of them just to remind all of them who's in charge, and it allows the subordinates to understand their role on the nest. Here we see an ant come and attack the nest. Ants are constantly trying to eat the eggs or the larvae, so this was really a daily occurrence, and the wasps react really quickly and run this ant off. We'll show you that again here in slow motion. It happens so quickly that it's worth breaking down how they respond to an ant attack. Here the ant approaches the nest and is immediately darted at by a defender. She just darted at it once, made it flee. Then the ant stays on the nest. It's still not gone. So she comes back looking for it, trying to figure out where it went. When she becomes aware of where it went, she moves toward it and darts at it again to make sure it leaves the area. And it happens so fast that it's hard to watch without slowing things down. But they had to do this multiple times every single day. Ants, mites, parasitic wasps, spiders. There's a whole host of threats that they're constantly having to defend the nest against. Just on this one day, we had footage of several ant attacks. Here's another one. She becomes aware of it and starts darting at it, tries to run it off. She successfully knocks it right away and it falls to the ground. Later that same day, yet another attack. You see how fast they come into the space and attack the nest. It's already on the nest. You see the ant there crawling around looking for an egg to grab or something to eat. Fortunately, our defenders run it off before it was able to grab anything. Here the ant is still stalking the nest, but they run it off by darting at it and staying alert. The vigilance required just for day-to-day survival for these wasps is pretty intense. They can really never relax 100%. They try to rest, but there's always something coming after them, and they're always trying to run off something, trying to attack them and destroy their young. So at the end of the day, you have to respect their scrappy ability to survive all of this, not to mention all the environmental factors beyond predators. Here the two new wasps on the nest engage in trophallaxis and dominance behavior, trying to find their place in this colony as it develops. On the same day, later here on June 14th, yet another ant attack came in, and this ant didn't want to give up. She ran it off a couple of times, and here it got onto the nest. It just came up around the other side. The ants are very aware that these nests provide a large amount of food and nutrition, so they don't leave it alone. They're constantly trying to collect food for their own nest, which is not far away. Here we see one of the main foundresses on the nest, the alpha queen, preparing a cell to lay an egg in it. This was a cell that was vacated by one of the pupating adults that is now out on the nest and working. So that cell is now vacant, so she's now going to refill it with a new egg. And what she's doing now is preparing the cell wall. As you may have seen in part 1 and 2, when an egg is laid inside a wasp nest, the wasp will lower its abdomen into the cell and attach it with a glue-like substance that their body produces to the side of the cell wall. So they don't drop the egg down into the bottom of the cell, they actually attach it to the side of the cell, and she's preparing the cell wall to receive the egg. That's what she's doing right now. That's why her head is down inside the cell while the others are out walking around. So in a moment here, she's going to turn around, drop her abdomen in, there you go. And when she gets set, she will get very still, and she'll stay there for about 2 minutes or so, typically on average. And she'll deliver the egg to the side wall. And she'll be in labor like that for a couple of minutes now. She'll come and go in and out of the cell like that a few times while she gets ready. She's just preparing. But pretty soon she'll stay in there for the duration of the labor and deliver the egg. We'll just skip ahead to that part to save some time here. So here she's finished prepping the cell, and now she's going to deliver the egg. So we'll show you this in real time. It only takes a couple of minutes, but it's an interesting process you don't see very often. As she's going into labor here and getting herself set up, the other wasps just go about their business and they continue as if nothing were going on at all. This has become such a common scenario that there's constant egg laying going on throughout the nest all the time. Whenever there's an empty cell, a new cell is built and constructed, it will be given an egg right away. If there's a pupating adult who has chewed his way out of the cell and it's vacant now, the egg will go in right after that. So this is a constant behavior. Now, typically it's just the alpha queen, which will do most of the egg laying. But every now and then, a subordinate will attempt to lay an egg, and if that egg is found by the queen, she'll pull it out and eat it and replace it with one of her own, just to maintain dominance on the nest. So we'll let you watch this in real time. This is the ambient sound of the neighborhood that they are living in all the time. You'll hear traffic, you'll hear neighbors, you'll hear people. It's a fairly busy place around the barn that they're attached to. So here she finished up with her delivery. The egg is now attached to the side of the wall inside that cell. And if we can get a look at it later, we will. Just depends on the angle of the camera. But for now, you can't quite see it. It's down about halfway into the cell on the side of the wall. And now she'll groom herself and get cleaned up and go about the rest of her day. Later this same day on June 14th, we captured some footage which was a little disturbing, but is often seen on wasp nests, so it's worthy of documenting here. What's happening here is they're pulling out one of the pupating adults from its cell, and what they proceed to do is tear it apart and eat it, either dead or alive, we're not sure. The reason for that may be a couple of things. It may not have been thriving, it may have been parasitized. They may need more food than they're getting right now. They might need more protein. It's really unclear why they do this specifically, because there's several reasons why they might do it. But on this day, they pulled out one that was really very fully developed and probably about to chew its way out of the cell, assuming it was still alive, and we don't really know for sure. This behavior is seen with larvae, it's seen with eggs, and it's seen with pupating adults. So they'll do this periodically throughout the nest development, and really we just have to guess as to why this particular one was killed. But you can see the glass partition we put between the camera and the nest is beginning to get debris on it from this activity. So you will see increasingly large amounts of debris dropping down onto the glass lens. We kept trying to move a little bit of it, but it kept coming back because they were tearing this other wasp apart, and the debris was landing on the glass that protected the camera. So we're going to show you the whole process in real time, because it's the kind of behavior that you should be aware of, because it's very common amongst all wasp species that we've seen with nests like this, Polistes, and also with yellow jackets and others. They will just simply do this sometimes. We've seen this in wild nests like this one, and we've also seen it in the lab in nests we've had in captivity. So you see, as the others become more aware of this, they start taking part in eating this pupating wasp. The one on the lower center of the frame right now is malaxating some of the material it took from the pupating wasp. And that material, protein-based material, will typically be digested as a liquefied protein and then regurgitated later to the larva, the other larvae in the nest. So it's not like this food will go to waste, it just becomes food for the nest. So it takes them about half an hour to completely consume this other wasp. So the rest of this video will be that process of them fully consuming this wasp. And at the end of the video, you'll see some of the debris left over. We'll show you the glass lens that was protecting the camera that all of the debris ended up falling onto. So just for your own interest in what this natural process looks like, how long it takes, and there'll be no narration here. It'll just be the ambient sound of the neighborhood they're in while this happens. And we'll catch you on part 4. If you want to get out of here now and not watch the rest of this process, that's okay. We'll catch up with you in the next part of this series. The reason we leave this footage in the series is so that from a scientific standpoint, if anybody can see anything wrong with it, is it malformed? To us, it looks like it may have the wing virus. We don't see any wings necessarily formed on this one. Can't tell if it's dead or been diseased. So it's worth taking a look at it from a scientific standpoint. If anybody happens to know, in particular, by looking at this footage, why that particular pupating wasp was pulled out, let us know in the comments, and we'll hopefully be able to research that. From here, there's no narration for the rest of the video, just the ambient sound of the neighborhood. There's some machinery sounds and other sounds of the neighborhood, so that's what you're hearing in the background. I think there might have been a tree crew or some other type of large vehicle around the area this day. Looks like they ate one of them. For some reason it didn't survive and they pulled it out and ate it. This is the lens we have, the lens protector. It's glass. Clamp it to the roof. Just because of this. All of this mess would fall onto the camera. And here we have a chewed up pupating wasp who didn't survive and was probably chewed up to feed the others protein.